Mr. Warren Wandrey of Byron Center, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, can you start us off with some background on yourself? To begin with, where and when were you born?
Okay, I was born November 9th, 1924 in Chicago, Illinois. And I pretty much grew up in Chicago for about my first 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. Then we moved out, my folks moved to Berwyn, which is a suburb of Chicago, and Cicero, which is another suburb, and that's where I went to high school.
And what did your father do for a living at that point?
My father was a streetcar conductor in Chicago for about 25 years. Mm-hmm. And he was in the First World War. And I remember he had his gas mask and he had his helmet. And he had a long picture of his whole division,
mm-hmm. or company at least.
Company, whatever it was, yeah. But he never talked about it much. Mm-hmm. I only remember him saying he was in France, and I remember he said they left Dover, went to Calais, because when we were in Europe, we left Calais and ended up at Dover, mm-hmm. right where he had been. But he said he was in France. Matter of fact, he left a small diary, and I gave it to my nephew because he wanted to write a story about it, about my background, mm-hmm. and the background of my family. And he ended up in the trenches of France and Belgium and the forest there.
The Argonne?
The Argonne, yeah, which had action in this war. But I remember him saying that they were marching down in the field, and they could see the enemy even. And the guy behind him marching, he said, "Will you change places with me, because I want to talk to the guy ahead of you." So they did. He said 2 minutes later, this guy got shot right in the head. He said it could have been him.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad, he was in the Army only about maybe a year or so, not much more. And he was finally discharged right after the war. He had double pneumonia. And he was fine. He married my mother when he was, she was only 18, I think. That would be 1918, mm-hmm. and he was 10 years older, so that would have been about 1928 when, no, it had to be before. I was born in 24. My sister, older than me, she was born in 21, so they must have been married about 1920. Mm-hmm. So my dad was he was about 30 years old, because he was born in 1890.
Mm-hmm.
And, but after about my folks were married, about 10 years after that, my dad, he began to, I can't say hallucinate, but he wanted to go in business for himself. Excuse me. And I'm gonna get rid of this. And he got to be, my folks would argue a lot, and it was pretty sad mm-hmm. state. Mm-hmm. And I don't think my dad ever really recovered. He was okay then. He would be okay for a few months, mm-hmm. then he would act up again, and he ended up in Hines Hospital and in another mental hospital, but they didn't lock the door, so he just walked out. Mm-hmm. And I keep wondering whether they could have helped him or not. He probably had the post-traumatic stress, mm-hmm. probably. And so my folks finally, we wouldn't let him in the house, and so he broke a window and broke in. My mother had to call the police, and we had to appear in court. So she the lawyer finally said, well, you better divorce him. It was sad. My sister never really got over it. I would go and visit him, and he came to our wedding when I was married in 1950. That was one of the few times, I think I saw him once more after that. But he must have had it pretty rough. And I know a lot of guys in World War II did too.
Sure. I mean, really, any war and that kind of thing can happen. And back in those days, they really didn't know what to do about it.
No, and even today, they're not sure, what to do about it.
Yeah.
But I was a radio operator for 18 months in World War II in the South Pacific, and I was in the Navy for 33 months, from July of 43 to March of 46. I was discharged in 1946.
Right. Now let's sort of back up the truck here a little bit.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about your growing up in Chicago suburbs and so forth, and you went to high school in Cicero, was that it?
Right.
Okay. And then when did you graduate from high school, or did you?
Yes, I did, but I had to get a deferment. On my birthday in 1942, I was 18, and I got my draft notice. But I got a deferment until July of 43, so I could graduate, because I hadn't graduated yet.
All right.
But then the day I graduated, I got my notice.
Right.
And I reported.
Okay. Now, do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I was in high school, and I can remember they called us into the auditorium. Morton High School was a huge auditorium. We had 10,000 students. My graduating class alone was 2,500. That was, and we had 2 a year. And they called us into the auditorium, and we heard President Roosevelt. They broadcasted to us about, this will go down in infamy and so forth. So I remember that very well. And one thing I didn't bring, I used to draw comic strips. I was an artist. I drew cartoons for the high school paper, and eventually in the service and on the ship, and eventually when I got into college, I drew for the paper. But originally I wanted to be a cartoonist. I don't know if you ever heard of Milton Caniff, Terry and the Pirates.
Yep.
He was my idol. I wrote to him, and he wrote back to me. Excuse me. And he wrote a 6-page letter to me explaining what paper to use, what pens to use, what ink to use, and so forth.
Wow.
Which I thought was tremendous.
All right.
But I drew full page. Matter of fact, when I went to radio school, after I had a month's leave after I finished radio school, I drew a cartoon strip showing what the guys would have to go through, what I just went through, and they printed it out. They reduced it to a little postcard size, and I wrote to the school and asked them what they did with that, and he sent me one of those postcards to show that they did reproduce. They did keep it.
Right. Now, to go back a little bit, back when you were in school, before Pearl Harbor, were you paying much attention to what was happening in the world, to the war in Europe and all of that?
Not too much. I watched the military channel now. I'm catching up on what I missed back then, back in 39, because I graduated grammar school in 39. And we knew about the war, of course, and we had drives for saving stamps, or what do you call them, bonds, freedom bonds, and so forth. And I drew a few cartoons about it, about doing it, but we didn't. There wasn't. I missed out a lot of it because I was so young then. I didn't pay much attention to it. Now I'm interested, and I'm watching military channel and catching up on what I missed.
Right. Okay. So it is kind of a shock then when Pearl Harbor actually happens.
Oh yeah.
Now, at that point, did you figure that? Did you have any thoughts of going and enlisting, or did you think, well, let's just see what happens?
I didn't really have a chance to enlist. because I got my draft
You got,
papers.
yeah, so quickly, yeah.
Yeah, almost a year before about 6 months before before I graduated.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember Lend-Lease, and I remember Roosevelt, and a lot of the things that were going on in the government then.
Mm-hmm.
And matter of fact, I majored in history in high school and in college, so I knew what was going on, but not to the extent that I should have. And of course, we didn't have television,
Right.
and even radio wasn't that. I go back a long ways. I can remember we didn't have radio even. I can remember we had crystal sets back then. I can remember the first television I saw when I came home from the service, little TV set that my aunt and uncle had, and in Chicago, and that was the first TV I saw, and all they had was boxing and wrestling and car races and that.
Yeah. Okay. So Pearl Harbor happens, and then you turn 18, you get draft notice, that gets deferred until you graduate from high school.
Right.
So when did you actually go into the service then?
It was in July of 1943.
Okay.
That was the year I graduated in June, and I got my notice to report from the draft board in Chicago. I reported there, took a physical, and I passed that. They sent me into a room, and there were 3 desks. And I only talked to one other person that ever had this, where they gave you a choice of what service you wanted. Navy, Army, or
Marines?
no,
Or Air Corps?
That was part of the Navy, but Air Force probably.
Yeah, well, the Air Corps was part of the Army, but
Yeah, right.
still, okay.
So I passed the colorblind. First, you had to take a colorblind test. If you couldn't pass that, you couldn't get in the Navy. So I passed that, and I got into the Navy. That was in July of
43.
1943. No, yeah, 43. Yeah.
Okay. Now, did you give this much thought? Do you have a sense of why you picked the Navy?
Well, I knew I didn't want to be in the Army. I knew that, and I had 3.5 years of typing in high school, and somebody told me, well, you could be a radio operator or a signalman, because I was in the Boy Scouts. I was a troop leader in the Boy Scout, and so I figured, well, the Navy would be the best thing, and I'm glad I did. I went to Great Lakes, drafted. Went to Great Lakes, spent 4 or 6 weeks at Great Lakes, which was right outside Chicago, where I was living in Berwyn, outside of Chicago. Went to school in Cicero High School, and then I got my draft notice to report, and that was in July or June of 43.
Okay. But then you go to Great Lakes, you do your boot camp at Great Lakes.
Right.
Can you describe that experience a little bit?
Yeah, because I had a heart murmur when I was a young kid. I had the strep throat, and I got a heart murmur. And when I was in high school, they examined you before you could graduate for any defect, and I had a heart murmur. And when I was drafted, I got my draft order to report, and when I went in for my physical, I passed that all right. Wasn't any problem. When I got to Great Lakes, to Navy school, Navy post, that's where they heard the heart murmur, and they said, well, we're going to keep you overnight, and we'll check you in the morning. And so they did, and I still had the heart murmur. And he said, does it ever bother you? I said, no, it never bothers me. I ride my bike, I do everything. They wouldn't let me take a gym in high school. And so I finally, the last year of high school, I did take gym, because I figured, well, I'm going to be drafted. I better get into some kind of physical shape.
Yep.
And after they kept me overnight at Great Lakes, I went back and he listened to me again. He said, "Does it ever bother you?" I said, "No." I said, "It never bothers me. I feel it, of course, but," I said, "it doesn't bother me." So he said, "Okay." He passed me, and I went through boot camp at Great Lakes, and I didn't have any problems there. I was out of shape, of course, because I hadn't exercised very much. I didn't have gym in high school until the last year of high school, and so I was pretty much out of shape. But I got through it all right. And when I finished, I went to Great Lakes. After I finished the boot camp, they asked me what I wanted to sign up for. Well, I knew semaphore from Boy Scouts, so I signed up. I said signalman, and they said, "How about radioman?" I said, "Okay, that's all right." Well, it turned out they picked me to go to radio school at Northwestern University, which was just north of Chicago.
Right.
I got three weekends a month off, and it worked out real good for me. I got home every other weekend, or every 3 out of 4 weekends. And what else was I going to say? We were living in, well, lived in Chicago my first 3 years, and then my folks moved out to Berwyn.
Right.
But I went to school in Cicero. High school was in Cicero. And but I was in 4th grade when we moved to Berwyn, and I finished grammar school in Berwyn, suburb of Chicago. And then went to Morton High School, and then when I went into service and got my draft notice to report, finally, when I graduated in June of 43.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we've covered sort of that part of it. We've gotten you into the radio school part.
Yeah.
What were they actually teaching you in radio school?
Well, they taught us code, Morse code, and of course I knew typing, so they kicked me out of typing class. I was doing 60 words a minute, and we were only copying 5 or 10 words a minute for code, but this was at Northwestern.
Right.
And by the time I graduated, I was up to probably about 24, 25 words a minute, which was pretty good. That was pretty fast for me. And I had no trouble typing. That was no problem. I think I typed 60 words a minute the first time they tested me. But I could get home every week. I could get home on Saturday and Sunday.
And how long did the radio school last?
That was about 3 or 4 months.
Okay.
I think I graduated, in July of 43, I entered boot camp at Great Lakes.
Right.
And then I graduated boot camp in September. In October, I was assigned to Northwestern University, where I went to radio school, and I learned to type. And but I got home 3 out of 4 weekends, and I graduated Seaman First Class Radioman in January of 1944.
Right.
And then I was assigned to a naval base in Schumacher, California, just outside of Oakland. If you'll excuse me, I have to refer to my notes.
That works just fine.
My memory isn't very good.
That's great.
And in March, I stayed there about a month. And March 5th, 1944, we left San Francisco for the South Pacific on the USS West Point, which was the
SS America?
SS America.
Right.
Hey,
I take notes too.
Yeah, and
can you describe a little bit what that ship voyage was like?
well, it took us about 2 weeks. We left San Francisco. We left San Francisco. We went down to, let's see. I graduated from boot camp at Schumacher. That was outside of Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went, then I ended up, I think, left out of some farther south. Might have been San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And I left on the SS America, which was the Navy took it over and it became the USS West Point. Mm-hmm. And we had 2 meals a day. We had saltwater showers. I still remember that. And we left Oakland, California, and went directly to New Guinea. Mm-hmm. I think we landed in Finch Haven, New Guinea, or actually it was Milne Bay, I guess it was.
Yeah. Now, as you were making the crossing, did the ship go by itself, or did you have escorts?
All by ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah, we went a pretty good speed. That's the reason they used it, because it could go faster than a submarine could
mm-hmm.
go. We probably went maybe 28, 30 knots. So we moved along for a long time.
Did you still zigzag? Did you change course a lot?
During the day, we would zigzag. At night, we would go straight then.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what was the weather like on the crossing?
It was beautiful. It was beautiful weather. We never stopped in Hawaii. I went back there later on, but we were all by ourselves. 2 meals a day, mm-hmm. saltwater showers.
About how many men were on the ship, do you think?
I think we had about 10,000.
Yeah.
Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force. We had bunks were 5 or 6 high, and we had our sea bag. We had to tie it to the bunk ahead of us and sleep. We just barely had room
mm-hmm.
if you were fat. I don't know how you ever would get in there. And but it took us 2 weeks, bypassed everything, and ended up in Finch Haven, New Guinea. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how many of us. Most of my people that I graduated from radio school at Devon and Northwestern, mm-hmm. most of them stayed on the ship. As far as I know, I was the only one that was put off. Mm-hmm. Now, why they put me off, I don't know. Okay. But anyway.
And then what unit did you get assigned to?
I was with the MTB, motor torpedo
boat
battalion, okay. The staff. Mm-hmm. I was on the staff. We had about, I don't know, maybe 10 radio operators. Mm-hmm. And we would go on board a different ship. We'd go on a PT tender for about a month and a half. And we would supplement the regular radio crew. Mm-hmm. And we would send, we would receive. And boy, I enjoyed that because I could send. We mm-hmm. were the commanding station. We were the controlling station. And I got to be pretty proficient at my code. I was to begin with, I think, after going to school, but I can remember other kids coming on board ship, and boy, they had trouble. They couldn't keep up with it, but I was able to keep up with it, and I got very proficient. And I was on PT tenders. I was on the, I don't know if I listed, yeah, I listed them. The USS Portunus, the USS Hilo, and the USS Calamares. And finally I got stationed on the USS Wachapreague, which was a new ship right out of Washington, Seattle, Washington. Mm-hmm. That's where it was built. That was the APA-8. And did I miss something? And that was AGP. Mm-hmm. That was a torpedo boat tender.
Right.
And the PT boats had a crew of about 12 or 14. They were all made of wood. I don't know, are you familiar with them?
Yeah, but it's good to describe them and what they were and what they did.
Okay, they had 3 Packard engines, and they ran on 100 octane gasoline, and they could speed up to about 40, 50, maybe even 60 knots. And of course, we carried 100 octane gasoline on our ship, on our tender for them, mm-hmm. as well as torpedoes and 37 millimeter and 50 caliber guns. And we also had 4 torpedoes on each boat. and radar. But the torpedoes had to be, they were in racks. Originally, they had them in torpedo tubes, but when I got in this was in 44 now, they were in racks, and they would have to, they were held on by iron bars or something, and we had to, they released those, just let them fall overboard, and then the engines were supposed to take off. Well, the torpedoes weren't very good. They all went, most of them went down to the bottom, and they never, as far as I know, we never sank a ship. But the Japanese, they were afraid of us because we got under attack. The first was it the first crew I was on? I'm trying to remember now. Let me go back. The first task for the PT boats was to pick up survivors in the water. That was their main task, from ships or pilots. Matter of fact, we could watch planes that would ditch into the ocean or into the bay, usually in the bay. And our PT boats were hooked right up alongside, tied up alongside, and they would take off because they were closer to where the planes had landed, and they would pick up the pilots. And I remember they would bring them over and put them in our sick bay. And I don't think many of them ever survived, because when I went down on sick bay one time, and they were all wrapped up in bandages, and they were in really bad shape. I think most of them died. I don't think they ever made it. Sometimes, most of the time, the planes would sink almost immediately. Some of them would float for a few minutes, but normally they would sink right away. Then our PT boats would pick them up. And but their main task was to go between islands, because the Japanese, when we would occupy one island and kick them out, the Japs would float to the next island. Well, our PT boats had to go in between the islands and pick up these Japanese. And if they wouldn't agree to be, most of them wouldn't agree to be picked up, then they would just commit suicide then. But our PT boats, they had their screws. Well, like most boats, small boats, they had the screws were underneath on the bottom of the ship of the boat. And if they ran over a reef, of course, it just destroyed those screws. And so we had what we called A-frames that would pick the PT boats up out of the water so they could replace those screws. Matter of fact, most of our guys thought that when the PT boats, they had one officer, usually an ensign, maybe a second lieutenant, and then about 12 or 15 crewmen, enlisted men. And if the commander of the PT boat, if he got tired of being out, he'd run over a reef on purpose. That's what they told us anyway. That was the scuttlebutt anyway. And so anyway, those A-frames would lift them up, and they would repair those screws and the drive shafts. And I had a note here: the PT tenders were the size of our tender was the size of a destroyer escort. We had two 5-inch guns, 40 millimeter and 20 millimeter, and 50 caliber guns. We had one 50 caliber gun that was installed right outside our radio shack, and they were meant that when you put pressure on where the shoulders were, the guns would fire. Well, somebody was leaning up against them one time, and the gun took off, and of course, when it shoots, it rotates automatically. And our radio shack was right there, and it went right. The bullets went right through, and our transmitters and our receivers were behind us, and they went through. One of them, I guess, did get through, or at least it threw debris, or what do you call it?
Shrapnel.
Shrapnel, yeah. And the one guy that was sitting there taking what they call Fox radio messages, he got hit in the back, I guess, with a little bit of the shrapnel. But that was the only damage we had. But they had to repair a lot of our vacuum tubes. Apparently, we got back into. They were able to get back into. I wasn't in the Radio Shack at that time, so I missed that part. But they told us about it afterwards. they had some excitement. So they ran on 100 octane gasoline, which we carried in our tender, and we also supplied them with food and ammo, and their crews would come aboard for clothes and laundry, and also for movies. We had movies on deck every night, or most of the time when we could get movies. But I missed a page. Yeah. Our food, I wanted to mention this. Did you have any other questions?
I will have some, but I'm letting you go on
Okay.
now because you're doing fine.
Our food came mostly, and our supplies came mostly from Australia, because the guys that weren't put off in New Guinea, they went down to Australia and spent the war in Australia. After I got back to the States, and I got posted on a ship in Lake Union, outside of Seattle, on the USS Crenshaw, which was just a supply ship, flat bottom for the invasion of Japan. And lo and behold, one of my shipmates, or one of my roommates from college at Northwestern, he was on the ship. So we got acquainted again. He spent the whole war in Australia. He almost married a girl in Australia. He ended up marrying a girl in Evanston, because he had met a girl in Australia, and he had met a girl when he was at Northwestern. I won't. He's probably gone by now. Most of the guys that my age are gone. We're dying off at 1,000 a week.
Something like that.
That's the reason they're doing this, I guess.
Well, it was, yeah, and the thing is, they started doing it 10 years ago, and that was, I was catch up with you guys while we could, and you're still here.
Yeah.
So that's pretty good.
I'm one of the few, I guess.
All right.
But once in a while, we would get fresh eggs from Australia, and that would last about maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and then we'd be back to powdered eggs and powdered milk and powdered this and powdered that. Even our cereal was a little square, and of course the milk was powdered milk, and you put that into the milk, and after a while it would loosen up, and you'd have cereal. It tasted terrible. At Thanksgiving, that's when we had a good meal at Thanksgiving and at Christmas. At Thanksgiving especially, we had roast turkey, mashed sweet potatoes, and I was on twice for Thanksgiving. And the last time I was on my regular ship, I was on a regular tender. I was on what, four tenders, and finally on the last tender was the USS Wachaprague. And that was built in Seattle, Washington, curiously enough. And I got so tired of going from one ship to another ship to another ship.
You might want to take your arm
Oh,
over there.
okay.
So when you first went out to New Guinea, you were at a base, and you would go from ship to ship and back and forth, and you were getting
Well, I was
tired
on
of
the
that?
base until they assigned me. I didn't keep a diary. I wish I had. But I remember being on another ship, and I met a fellow that used to be in our Boy Scout troop when I was a kid. I was a patrol leader, and he was an assistant scoutmaster. And I met him, and I think we may have gotten off at Milne Bay, and then I think I got on this ship and went up around the point to Finchhaven.
Right.
I think that's if I'm not right, I think that's the way that.
Yeah.
And then I was there for about 2 nights, 2 days. One night, all I did was they took me to and a bunch of guys, and we loaded bags of cement onto a truck. It was on a skid taken off the ship, and we had loaded onto this truck. We spent all night, and here I am. I weighed about 114 pounds. Here I am carrying 100-pound cement bags. At least it felt like 100 pounds. And so then finally I got assigned to 4 different PT tenders. and I was on the staff. I wasn't part of the ship's company.
Right.
And so they didn't, we were treated like, we were, we were too good for them. That's the way we were treated. But finally, I got kind of tired of that. So when I got onto the Wachaprague, I was on there for about a month. And I finally talked to the radio communication officer. I said, can I transfer to ship company? Because I said, I'm getting tired of this being shuffled around and kind of rebuffed. You're second class. And actually, we were the commanding controlling station when we were on the tender. We were the controlling station.
Right.
Everybody had to ask us permission to transmit. And I was promoted to third class radioman, third class. And then I studied, and I finally, after I was ship company, I got to be a radioman second class. So that was pretty good. If it was only during the war that they did that fast. Otherwise, it probably would have taken me 5 years.
So basically, you went to the communications officer, and so he got you assigned to
I got assigned to the ship company. And we would be in the radio shack for 4 hours. We were on duty for 4 hours. Then we had 12 hours off. So, but every night we were either on midnight. The first night I was on midnight to 4 in the morning. Then we rotated off. Then I was on at 4 in the morning till 8 in the morning. Then we went another 12 hours. Went back to 8. Went back on duty 8 at night and at midnight. Then the next time, back to midnight again. So you never really got a full night's sleep.
Yeah.
And that was hard. I would fall asleep. Sometimes, you're sitting there copying code. Pretty soon you begin to nod off, and the guy next to you poke you, hey, you better wake up. But
was there an explanation of why you did it that way?
well, one ship, I don't remember which ship it was. There they put us into a separate compartment. And they said, okay, now you can sleep as long as you want. Make up what you lost. But the other ships, they wouldn't. We had to get up when the ship got up, and we had to go lay down when the ship went lay down. And one morning, they had reveille, and I overslept. I was supposed to be up at 4 in the morning. No, well, we had to get up at reveille at 5, I guess, 5 or 6. And I had just gotten off at 4, and I had just gotten to sleep, and the quartermaster came around, and he said, hey, you're going to be put on report. You're sleeping past reveille. I said, well, I just got off watch an hour ago. I said, he said, that doesn't make any difference. No excuse. So then after that, I had to get up at 5 o'clock with the cooks. So I'd get off duty at 4. By the time I got down to my bunk, it probably was 4:15. It was just about time to get up again, to get up with the cooks. The quartermaster would come around. I had to be up. That went on for a whole month. I don't know how he survived that, but I talked to the communication officer one time. I said, why can't we at least get a decent night's sleep? Because we're not top shape when we come back on duty like that. Most of them didn't pay any attention, but the one time they finally did. They put us in a separate area where they said, don't let these guys sleep. So,
now, did that work? I mean, did it help? Did you do better when you got some sleep?
Oh yeah, well yeah.
Okay. All right.
Otherwise, we had to sleep on deck, take a cat nap on deck, and we use our lifesaver as a pillow. And of course, then about 10 o'clock in the morning, they come around, clean sweep down, 4 nap. So, come on, get up, you lazy guys. What are you sleeping out here for? I mean, no excuse, And so we had to get up and move and let them wash down the deck, and finally, But I wrote home to my mother every day, because Did I tell you I got my draft notice when I turned 18?
Yeah, you did.
In 42, and
right.
Then I finally got the report in June of 43. I reported in 43.
Right.
So this was about, when was this? This was about
Getting
40,
into the middle of 44 now.
well, it was in August.
Yeah.
It was in August of 44. Well, I was already on the watch and pray. And did I leave out anything?
All right.
Oh, that one Thanksgiving, they put me on part of the work crew to get supplies from Leyte Gulf. Well, I think it was on Leyte, the island of Leyte.
Yeah.
That's where our supplies were. And we had K rations or C rations, I think, for our Thanksgiving dinner there. And I remember the Filipinos that were working with us, they were all around a bowl of rice, and they would just scooped in with their right hand. That's right. They had to use their right hand. I found out later, why, because they had to wipe their rear end with their left hand. You ever hear that?
No, but it does make a certain amount of sense.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the way they did it in the Muslim world, the whole Muslim world. That's the way they did it.
Now, by the time, so now you get into late in the year 44. Now, the invasion of the Philippines has happened. We've been to Leyte. Now, your ship, the Wandrey, was actually involved in the action surrounding that whole invasion.
Yeah, we were in New Guinea. We were stationed in New Guinea the whole time. We went up around to Hollandia, which was in northern, and then to western New Guinea, which was, what do they call that? Anyway, that was a different part of. That wasn't part. That was part of the West Indies, or the
Dutch East
West
Indies. Yeah.
And we were in Mios Wandrey, and we were there about 4 months. And our PT boats, they came along with us, and then they would go between the islands, back and forth, picking up Japs that were going between the islands, and they would sometimes they would send ammunition to them and food and supplies, you know.
Right. Now, did you ever see any of the Japanese prisoners?
No, but I saw one floating in the water in Leyte Gulf. As we were coming in, there was a Jap floating in the water. That was about the day after the invasion, because our LSTs were all lined up against the shore there, and that was I think that was the 21st of October when they landed.
Yeah. And then on about the 24th, you get a whole series of sea battles going on all around there.
Yeah. We were, on the 24th, they sent us down to an island. I didn't bring my map in. Down at the tip of Leyte, at the tip of Leyte Gulf.
Okay.
There's another little island there. I forget the name of that. But on our way to the Philippines, we stopped at Palu.
Yeah.
That was in one of the islands that we had occupied.
Yeah.
And then we left there on the 18th of October, and the 19th of 44 is when we entered Leyte Gulf. And we dropped anchor in the northern San Pedro Bay. That's right near Tacloban, which was the capital of Leyte. And we saw that we could see the beach landing, see the LSTs, and off of Samara, which was the next island that was facing the Pacific, there were 16 escort carriers there, and they were the ones that were flying over us. And the airstrip, I was talking to my roommate from college. He worked on the airstrip at the Tacloban airstrip that our Marines were fighting. He was in the Marines. They were fighting to take over that landing strip. And I remember when we saw the first P-38, because that indicated that we got land-supported aircraft now. Before that, it was all from the
carriers.
From the carriers, right. And anything else I left out? But we all cheered when we saw that P-38. Then on October 24th, 39 PTs were ordered to take up position in 13 sections, three boats each, all along this Mindanao sea there. And they were supposed to be the long-range lookouts for the 7th Fleet, which was up there at the southern entrance, or northern entrance, I guess you would call it. The southern entrance to Leyte, the northern entrance for us. And they, when the Japs finally entered Surigao, not Surigao, but the what do they call it?
Leyte Gulf.
The Leyte Gulf. Well, before they got the Mindanao Sea was the entrance to Leyte Gulf.
Right.
You're familiar with all of that, aren't you?
Yeah, part of the job.
Have you ever interviewed anybody from the PT boats?
Only one fellow, and he wasn't, I don't think he was at Leyte Gulf, but I have interviewed one crewman who was based out of Guadalcanal.
Okay. Because we had 39 boats that were split up all along there. And the first three that saw the Japanese invasion, there were 7 of them, 7 ships, 2 battleships and 4 destroyers come up. And our ship, what they should have done is report it to the 7th Fleet that they saw the Jap fleet coming in, because so far they hadn't heard anything. But instead they tried to attack. Well, their torpedoes, they tried to fire them, and all they had were they were in cages.
Right. You had mentioned that they were in these racks and they just dropped in the water and they sank.
Right. They had a wire attached to them that was supposed to ignite the engine, and it was something they never took off. So as far as I know, none of their torpedoes ever hit a ship. But they got hit. Those 3 ships got hit, knocked out all their radios, so they couldn't report it. So one of the ships was smart enough to go to one of the other PTs farther up the sea, and he said, "Would you pass it on?" So he passed it on to our ship. So apparently our guys heard it, that where they were down at the entrance to the Mindanao Sea, and that was the first that the battleships and the cruisers and the destroyers, they were up there waiting for they figured the Japs were going to come up that way because our invasion was right there on the Leyte beach. And so finally they got word, and we had what they called a TBS, the torpedo boat squadron. It was their network. And it was a voice. It was all by voice, what we call plain language. And so they finally got the word through. But those first 3 PT boats, they got, I think all 3 of them got hit, and all of them their radios were knocked out, so they couldn't communicate. And but they got back to us. Well, no, I think later on I heard that in one of the books I read, I didn't bring it in. They said that one of the PTs had to be beached, and I don't know if they ever got it back to us or not, but it was pretty beat up, and otherwise our boats came back pretty undamaged, but they got fired on quite a bit. Just the small calibers. And all they had on were small caliber. They couldn't, outside of torpedoes, they couldn't do much against the battleships and cruisers and even the destroyers. And one time our torpedo boats started coming back to us, and we were in this little inlet, and the Jap destroyers started following the PT boats, figuring, well, they're going to lead us right to the tender. But they must have figured, well, maybe it's a trap. So they turned around and left. So otherwise with that 110 octane fuel, one plane flew over us. We shot down 5 planes, and one of the planes during the night, one night, I think it was like the 24th, 25th, one plane went over and did drop a bomb and hit one of our PT boats tied up. It didn't hit them direct; it hit them about 6 yards short. But it woke me up. I was in my bunk, and it woke me up. And I thought, well, boy, they're going to call general quarters, but they never did. Apparently, there were no more planes reported. they didn't catch any more on the radar. So, but I heard about it the next day, the next morning, that we had been attacked. And well, if that had hit us, we would have. We had torpedoes lined up on all the way on our gangways, and we had 100 octane gasoline. We would have gone blown sky high.
Yeah. Now, this phase here, you get a late October, you have the Battle of Leyte Gulf, you have Surigao Strait, you have several different actions all going on kind of all around the landing area in different directions with different degrees of success, including one where destroyer escorts were holding off battleships on one end. Now, from your position on the PT tender, how much did you know about what was going on?
We really didn't know anything that was going on, but we could see over the island. We could see. At first, we thought it was lightning, and I think maybe some of it was. But after a while, I just kept on going. I could only be on deck for a few minutes, but they said afterwards, the guy said, "Boy, the sky was just lit up," because out of those first 7 ships, they sank 6 of them. Only 1 destroyer was left. And then behind those 7 were another 6 or 7. That was Admiral Shima. I've been reading about it. He was in command of the second, and they weren't coordinated. Shimashura, I think, was the admiral of the first fleet that came in. They called it the Southern Fleet, and he didn't even warn Admiral Shima that, hey, you're going to run into trouble. He just let him go ahead, and he lost 3 ships, and nobody ever got through. But Halsey, he was supposed to be guarding the San Bernardino Strait, and he took off north, and he left it unguarded. And so there were three destroyers and 3 destroyer escorts, and the 3 baby flat tops were the only ones there. And we thought sure that they would have come around after reading about it afterward. That all they had to do was come around the point there of Samar, and we would have been sitting ducks there. Fortunately, most of the LSTs had unloaded, and the supply ships unloaded, so it would have been too late for that. And that's what the Admiral Kurita, I think his name was. I think.
That's what he was after. To stop the landing.
That was his job. Just like it was Halsey's job to stop them. And they both
messed up.
They both didn't do their job.
All right.
It's interesting to read about it afterwards.
Now, in general, you're talking about sort of the PT boats and so forth, and these things, they're made of plywood and so forth. Now, did the tenders have to patch a lot of holes and replace sheets of plywood, or what did they do?
Yeah, well, most of the damage, because on any ship, and especially the PT boat, the screws stick out at the bottom. There's nothing there to protect them. On a regular ship, you got the whole ship to protect them, but on a PT boat, there's nothing there. And if they run over a reef.
So it was the damage you fixed was more often going to be that kind of damage more than battle damage.
Yeah. I didn't really pay much attention because I was either sleeping or catching up on other things. And but I remember some of the tenders had what they call an A rig or an A hoist, so they could hoist the boat right out of the water.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that. Okay. Now, after those battles around Leyte Gulf, did things quiet down a little bit for a while?
Oh yeah. I'm trying to remember. Most of the messages we got came in coded. Well, all of them came in coded. But after a while, some of them even came in plain language. They were asking Halsey, "Where are you? Where are you? Where in the world are you?" And they were coming in fast and furious, and the speed was picking up all the time. We had a hard time catching up, and especially at night, because at night we had certain frequencies we used. In the daytime we used, I think, lower frequencies. And at night we used higher frequencies, or maybe the other way around. So at night, or in the middle, before midnight, we began to switch over. Well, sometimes the atmospheric conditions were not very good for one or for the other or for both at the same time. And then we'd put one on one ear on one frequency and one on the other one, and hopefully when one faded out, we'd catch it on the other one. Sometimes they would both fade out at the same time, and we'd lose maybe 5 or 10 characters.
So would they broadcast the message on both frequencies?
Yeah, identical, yeah. And I think the ones that we called it Fox. It was the Fox network. And I think it came out of Hawaii, out of Pearl Harbor. Although I've read where there was other control stations around New Guinea. But I don't remember that we ever, I think they all came. I remember one time I was trying to communicate to a ship. I could see him. He was across the harbor from us. And he couldn't hear me. And finally, somebody in Pearl Harbor, he said, I can hear you 5 by 5. I can hear you clear. And I can hear the other guy, but you can't hear each other. He said, give me the message and I'll relay it. I thought that was real strange, because here I could see him and he could see me, but a cloud or a rain squall would interrupt it. So we missed it. But if we missed it, then the next morning we would call one of our other tenders and we'd get what we missed. And we'd fill it in and put us in encoding. For a month, when I got onto the Watcher Preg, for about a month and a half, they put me into the coding and decoding, which was about the size of a closet, not even a closet. And we had all the decoding and encoding machines, and it was interesting. But I enjoyed transmitting. I enjoyed, with the coding, and I was good at it. And that's when I said, well, I would like to switch over to ship's company. But I didn't realize how much I was going to miss it, because being a control station meant you did a lot of transmitting and a lot of receiving. And but it was interesting. Our chief petty officer for our Radio Shack, he could copy 50, 60 words a minute. I was lucky if I could do 25. And so he would copy all of the. I brought some of the stuff along to show you, where he would copy it, and he would do it with a 2-finger peck. And he would talk to you at the same time. That guy, he was fabulous. He must have been a 20-year veteran to be able to do that. I couldn't remember one word, from the last word.
Okay. Now, we kind of gotten your story up to the battles around Leyte Gulf and so forth, and then after that, there were further landings in the Philippines, on Luzon and Lingayen Gulf.
We were in the Lingayen Gulf. I think there were about 100 ships that went up there, and there were, I think, 3. No, we were all alone. We were the only PT tender, and we had we had one. I think we had maybe 13 boats that went with us, and the ship behind us. We watched. No, it was the ship ahead of us, because we saw a Japanese plane come in and aiming for the rudder, because that's the first thing they ran for. And by the time we got permission to fire, he crashed into him. But he made it all the way up to Leyte, what was it, Leyte?
Lingayen Gulf.
Lingayen.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're further ahead than I am. Have you been reading up on it?
Well, sure.
Huh?
It comes with the territory.
Does it?
Yeah. You look things
Yeah,
up.
it was Lingayen Gulf. And that ship got through, and our ship never got hit. But that's how close we came, the ship ahead of us. And we were up there about 4 months. And
And then your last action was at Tarakan down in Borneo?
Yeah, yeah. Well, my first action was in Borneo. Then from there we went up to Palu, I guess, and then into Leyte Gulf.
Right.
And then after that we went up to
Lingayen Gulf.
the Lingayen Gulf.
Right.
Yeah. No.
Or
no, then,
someone else from Luzon first? Or?
yeah. What was the other one up there? Okay, Tarakan was the. I'm getting ahead of myself, and
Well, Tarakan's the very end.
pardon?
That's one of the last things in the war is Tarakan. That's after the Philippines.
Was it?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember now. My mind isn't what it should be, but we entered Tarakan Bay. That was right after the invasion of the Philippines, Tarakan Bay, and then after that we left. That was Leyte. We left that. I ended up there 3 times. Lingayen Gulf. Did you have heard of that?
Yeah, we've covered that here.
Did we?
already,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. That was the last we were in. That was where the ship, the Jap plane, hit the ship ahead of us.
Yeah, you got that.
And then we ended back up. You'll have to excuse me. My mind isn't as sharp as what
It's okay.
it should be or what it used to be. But then we ended back, and we ended up back at.
Did you go back to Leyte again?
We got back to Leyte, and then we got back to Tarakan. That's right. We got back to Tarakan, which is the at the mouth of the Lingayen Peninsula there, or the Lingayen Gulf.
No, because Tarakan's in Borneo. That's down in the East Indies.
Okay. Yeah, I'm getting mixed
Okay.
up.
Well, that's really okay. Basically, what we're most interested in here are the things that you do remember or that stick with you about the experiences
Okay,
you
the first
had.
place we were at was New Guinea, and that was. Then we went up to Tarakan in the Philippines.
Well, Tarakan's, that's Borneo. That's the East Indies. Leyte, it's sort of
Okay,
New
Tarakan.
Guinea.
That was the last place we were at.
Yeah.
Was at Tarakan. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You were also, I guess, you have a number of watercolors, pictures that you
Right.
made
Oh, that's where you saw it.
of different places where you went.
Right.
And another place in the Philippines that you went to was Zamboanga, which is kind of
Zamboanga
one of the
was
southern islands.
at the southern tip.
Yeah.
And from there we went down to Borneo. To
Yeah, that's Tarakan.
that was Tarakan.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
All right, you're getting me back into.
Okay. Now, you were making these drawings. Did you ever get on shore in these places?
Yes, we did. I don't know if we got ashore in Leyte. I think we did. If it wasn't the first time, it was the second time.
Yeah.
After we went up to Lingayen, then we came back, and we were back in Leyte Gulf, and we got offshore at Tacloban. Yeah.
That's right, because you mentioned going ashore to get having sea rations for your Thanksgiving dinner.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And we went ashore for beer. They gave us two pints of beer, I guess. I didn't drink, but some of our guys got pretty loaded. You know, it was Australian beer, and that was more powerful than our beer was.
Stronger than what they were used to.
Yeah. And but I would go ashore at Tarakan and then in Borneo.
Did you ever see much of the local population in these places?
No, not really. They came alongside, especially in the Philippines. They would come alongside, and I can remember our guys they were begging for food and begging for clothes and that, and we would barter with them, and otherwise we just threw stuff to them because they, poor people, they had very little. And I got ashore at Tarakan, and that was in, Tarakan was in, I lose track of things now. Up in Borneo, it was Tarakan.
Yep.
And in Leyte, it was, Zamboanga was in the southern tip.
Right.
And then, what was the capital? Tacloban was where we were. And we got to shore, and I brought back some souvenirs from there. I remember I bartered and got a blanket or a quilt that the natives had put together, and I think I finally threw that away. I don't think I kept it. But it was exciting for an 18-year-old kid.
Now, were there ever situations that were scary, where you really got worried about what was going to happen?
Well, I guess. I was tied up in the radio shack. During general quarters, my duty was in the radio shack along with about 5, 6 other guys. And so all this was going on outside, and I didn't know what was happening. And finally, afterwards, I read about it. And but I was on duty for 20 hours straight on what we call general quarters, because we were under attack.
Right.
And finally, when we that was during the invasion of Leyte and Samar.
Yep.
And our PT boats were very active in that. We had 30. I think they were in groups of 3, and I think there were 12. So there were about 36. We had about 36. No, we had more than that.
I think you said 39. So
Yeah,
maybe
I think we
13
had
groups.
39. Yeah. But my duty was always in the radio shack, and they would let us out to go to the head, and to go and get something to eat, and once in a while to go out on deck, and so I could see the ships firing and our ships firing. We shot down 5 planes, 5 Jap planes.
Now, did you ever see any of them attacking the Japanese planes?
Our ships attacking them?
No, did you see any of the Japanese planes themselves?
Yeah, I did. I was on a deck one time. We weren't at general quarters, but I remember I was on deck, and we were in this little harbor, and the hills went over, and all of a sudden we could see a plane against that background, and somebody said, "Look, there's a Jap plane," and about that time, general quarters sounded, and I was right outside the radio shack, so I had to go back in there, and our guys had to go, and we could hear the guns going off. And but I didn't see any actual action except for that.
Yeah, because you had a job to do.
I had my job to do, and we could hear the ships. Our ship had 5-inch guns, 2 5-inch guns, 50 caliber.
Probably some 40 or 20 millimeter.
40 and 20 millimeter, yeah. But we were in communication with our boats. They were reporting in, and
now, when you were sending or receiving messages, and you're doing this in code, did you know what the code translated to, or were you just
No.
copying down characters?
I was copying down characters.
Okay.
I'll show you what we were copying down. It was 5 characters and 10 characters, or 10
Kind of these
groups,
5-character words, yeah.
10 groups in a line. And then you drop down and do the same thing over again. And between the 5, we left a space. so that it were columned. It ended up being 5 columns across, 5 columns deep, and then 5 columns. We just kept on typing that way.
So even though you're getting the messages, you don't know what they're saying.
We had no idea what they were
So you're really
saying.
in the dark in terms of what's happening there.
But for about a month and a half, they put me in the decoding machine, or decoding room,
Yeah.
which was a little room, no bigger than from the microphone to here. And we would get the message. We would get the messages, coded messages, and we would type it in, and the decoder, the machine would decode it for us, and it would work the opposite. Then we'd get a plain language, what we call plain language, and type it in there, and it would encode it depending on what we punched in. So it was interesting from that standpoint. I enjoyed sending messages,
Right.
being a transmitter.
Right.
I enjoyed doing that, and I could type 60 words a minute. I was a good typist because I had 3.5 years in high school.
And if you were doing the decoding, then you didn't have to keep up with stuff that was coming in or get it out fast. So it's so you're not using your skill in the same way.
Well, you did it afterwards. So there was a delay there.
Yeah.
There was always a delay. So the captain, he would get it maybe an hour after it was transmitted, maybe 2 hours even. And that was what Halsey was complaining about, that he was getting messages too late. Well, they would pile up in the Radio Shack, and maybe the last message was on top, whereas it should have been on the bottom. And so what should have been transmitted first was transmitted last. That was a problem always. But we got through it, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed especially the transmitting.
Right.
Copying got monotonous.
Now, do you remember where you were when the war ended?
Oh yeah. We were in Borneo, Tarakan, Borneo, and it was about. I was on watch, I think, or maybe I wasn't. But anyway, I was outside the Radio Shack. I was on deck, and maybe I was inside. I don't remember.
Okay.
But anyway, we all went on deck because they were firing the guns, and everything was going crazy. And I don't know if we kept on transmitting and copying. I don't know what happened there, but I suppose the war actually wasn't over. This was when we found out that they wanted peace. That was the first thing we got.
Right.
Peace wasn't declared until a month later. When that happened, we didn't even celebrate it anymore. It was, as far as we were concerned, it was all over.
Yeah. Well, I guess they agreed to surrender in kind of early August and took a little longer to actually sign the papers.
It was actually,
and have all that.
I think I wrote that. I even wrote it down. I was discharged March 19th, 1946. I was discharged. But I came back from overseas in about July, June or July.
I think September was what your notes, something indicated. You had something written down that said you got back in September, which would be after the war was over.
Well, yeah, but I was still in Tarakan,
Right.
Borneo, when the war ended.
Yes, that's August.
That was August, okay. And the war wasn't officially over until, what, June?
Well, no, later in August.
Yeah, but the peace wasn't signed until June, wasn't it?
Well, no, I think you're confusing Europe with Japan there, because Germany surrenders in May and they have Potsdam in June.
I've got a note that Japan surrendered September 2nd, 1945.
That may be the signing ceremony, yeah.
Yeah, the signing ceremony.
Right.
And we were in Zamboanga on the 12th in the Philippines. That's the very southernmost.
Right.
And then September 30th, my tour ended. My 18 months ended. And I don't know how, but I got back up to Leyte on October 25th. And I got on the USS Cape Johnson AP-172 to come home on. And I arrived in Seattle November 2nd, 1945. We traveled 6,700 miles. And November 3rd, we left Seattle for Chicago on a North American, and I got a 30-day leave. But I still had 4 months to go on my service. So I was assigned to the USS Crenshaw, APA 76 on Lake Union in Seattle, Washington. And I think I went on the, no, I reported to the Crenshaw, USS Crenshaw, yeah, in Lake Union, just outside Seattle. And I was there for about 3 or 4 months. And finally I got enough points to be discharged. And we were all set to go to Australia. My ship was all set to go to Australia. We were a flat bottom boat. And when the war ended, or when the treaty was signed, or whatever, they started decommissioning all the ships. And so my ship was going to be decommissioned sometime after March in '46. I was 21 years old, and that's when I got home. And in '46, March 19th, 1946, I was discharged. I was 91 years old. And
21 years old.
21,
Yeah.
what did I say?
91. Not quite there yet.
Yeah, 21 years old. And then I had 4 years of college, and I was married in 1950. Did you have that information?
No. Where did you go to college?
I went to college in Carthage, Illinois. It was a Lutheran college down in central Illinois, just across the river from Keokuk, Iowa.
Okay.
You know where that is? And where are you from originally?
Chicago area.
Oh, you're from the Chicago area,
Yeah.
okay? Because I was raised I was born in Chicago,
Right.
but I was raised in Berwyn.
Right.
And
Yeah. So you go to college, you get married, and then what kind of work did you go into after college?
I went into I was a radio operator. I was a radio operator in the Navy. I reported to when I came back, I was discharged in Chicago. And I got, the day I came home, I got my orders to report to the Navy. This was after college. Okay. Then after college, they put me, I'm trying to go back now.
Did you stay in the Naval Reserve after
No,
World War II, or?
no, I got out. I got married.
Yeah.
I went 4 years to college. GI Bill paid for that. Then I became a radio operator in the Navy.
So you went back to the Navy?
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm getting ahead of myself here. The GI Bill paid for my college. I was married in 1950. I better read it just to
Go ahead.
keep myself. I had 2 daughters, 3 granddaughters, 1 great-granddaughter, and we celebrated our 61st anniversary in 1950, 51. No, 61.
Well, or in 2011, or? So you
Okay,
got married in 1950, that would be
Yeah,
61 years
okay.
ago.
I'm getting all confused.
That's okay.
I wanted to go buy my papers because I thought that would keep me. Japs surrendered in 45, and I started school in 46.
Yep.
I went 4 years.
Yep.
I finally went to Carthage College down in Southern Illinois. And
Well,
beginning to run a blank.
that's
Getting confused.
well. At this point, I mean, we've covered your military career, which is really the purpose
Yeah.
of these interviews, and you have
Okay.
laid that out for us very well. Now, if you think about it a little bit, how do you think your time in the Navy affected you? Were you any different when you came out, or had you learned things?
I was 19 actually when I went into the Navy, and I was in for 33 months.
Mm-hmm.
I was discharged in March of 1946,
6.
and I went to school for 4 years. Went 2 years to junior college, just outside Chicago, Cicero. Ever hear of Morton Junior College, Morton High School?
High school, yes. But, yeah.
Okay, that's where I graduated from Morton High School in 43, and I got my draft notice in 42.
But I guess my question was sort of overall, what effect do you think your time in the service had on you? So when you got out, you're different, were you just more grown up, or?
Yeah, I was in for 33 months, and it was at a very impressionable age.
Mm-hmm.
I was 18 when I went in, and I was 21 when I got out, and it was a good time for me. My ship was never hit. I was fortunate.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody, as far as I know, only our PT crews were. We had 3, I think, were killed.
Mm-hmm.
Two or 3 were killed. Some were damaged. 3 ships were damaged. But it was a great experience, and I was lucky. They sent me to radio school, and so I had a good education that way.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go right overseas.
Mm-hmm.
I spent about 3, 4, or 5 months in radio school and on leave, and by the time I got over to New Guinea, it was 45.
Well, 44, but yeah.
45, 44, 45. Must have been 44, yeah. Because I spent 44, 43, I was drafted, 44, 45, and then 46, I was discharged.
Right. All right. Well, I'd just like to close out here by thanking you for coming in and telling your story today.
Thank you for putting up with my loss of memory. I can get easily confused, but I appreciate the opportunity.
We got there. All right.